yelling at me just for saying that I'm a little hungry. That's all right. We're gonna be just fine. We got college football is upon us. Championship week here at Stokastic. Not 15 games, not 14 games, not even 10 games. We had 2 games last night. We get a beautiful 8-game slate, and we're ready to analyze every single angle, build some lineups, talk about some bets, talk about how you can get some money on various sites. And to do all that, I'm Rasa and Matt Gajewski joins me. Sir, sounds like you're feeling good. Looks like you're sporting a little Marquette gear. Big game for them on the hardwood. They're not on the slate for obvious reasons. We're going to dive into it, but I just wanted to say, 2 games down. How are you feeling with an appetizer down in the championship week?
Feeling good. We learned a lot. Washington controlled their own destiny, now making it extremely hard for Texas, Bama, Ohio State. They're really going to be praying for a Florida State loss tonight, which is now a 1-point spread. We'll talk about the quarterback situation that's in flux. But yeah, I mean, probably worst case scenario for the playoff committee would be a Bama win today. Then they'd have a real logjam on their hands. But yeah, Washington is in. Michigan is presumably in as long as they take care of the JV team that is Iowa. But yeah, I think the picture is starting to develop.
It is, and ironically, it's starting to develop and getting more unclear by the day because they're going to have a big problem if Bama does in fact win. I think Florida State controls their own destiny. I think it's pretty clear they're not going to get left out if they win. I don't care who plays quarterback. We're going to get to all that and more. I do want to start right off the bat. Let's get some good vibes in here, and certainly getting some money on your money can do that. You see it on the screen. It says, get up to $100 deposit match with Sleeper. You haven't been over there. Very, very new platform. Another way. It's just another way to get exposure, and not just college football. Obviously, they've got that, but any type of sport. NFL tomorrow, all sorts of over-unders over there. You've seen this on maybe social, the free squares. What that means, they said something basically as a freebie. So they've got Trevor Lawrence over a half a yard tomorrow. Sleeper has that. Underdog has that. These are the type of sites. Take advantage of that. Obviously, Prize Picks as well. So I just wanted to mention that right off the top. If you are looking to take it to the next level, use this information in multiple ways. Those links are below. And before we even dive into these 8 games, I always like to ask you, because I saw on Twitter last night, you had a couple of Prize Picks numbers that were appealing to you. What do you think of some of those props out there in the world?
Tighter slate, but you'll get that when I only did the 8 games today. I didn't look at last night's, but I still think there's some edges. One that I took was Alan Bowman under 250 passing yards. That one just mathematically didn't line up to me when you saw Oklahoma State's implied team total sitting around 19 and a half. They're 15-point underdogs to Texas. That total is around 55. It's kind of jumped between 54 and a half and 55 and a half. And mathematically, when you have a team implied for 19 points, it's really hard to get a quarterback projecting for 250 yards and then a running back in the same offense and Ollie Gordon projecting for over 100, which is what Prize Picks has. So something's wrong here. And Oklahoma State, they do have a pretty heavy pass rate. They're about 55%. And Texas could force them into pass-heavy game script, but they've also shown a willingness to just ride Ollie Gordon regardless of game script. So out of the 2 people I think that are over-projected in that offense, being Ollie Gordon and Bowman, I'd rather take shots on the under with Bowman. He's also seen decreased efficiency in tougher matchups, which Texas certainly will provide. The other 2 I took were Kendall Milton over 55 and a half rushing yards and Jacob DeJesus for UNLV over 28 and a half receiving yards. Just briefly for DeJesus, he's the wide receiver 2 for this team, dealt with a midseason injury. And since he's come back, he's worked his way into a full-time route share, up around 75% last week, and back-to-back 7-target games. He's firmly the wide receiver 2 behind Ricky White in a game that's going to get back and forth between Boise State and UNLV. Really high total up at 61 points. And then Milton, he's also dealing with an injury, but he's finally starting to work his way away from it. He missed a lot of the mid-season, and they've been very cautious with him, as Georgia has with a lot of skill position players. Last 2 games, he's outcarried DeJuan Edwards, and he's done so with incredible efficiency. So I don't see how this goes back to the early season committee where it was like a 70-30 split. At worst, I think you're looking at 50-50 at best, and what they should do is like a 60-40 in favor of Milton. So those are the 3 that I took personally.
Yeah, definitely. And we're going to, again, dive into all of it. You just saw the video playing over under. These are the type of things. So shout out to Sleeper. Make sure you go there and use the link, obviously, because you want the money on your money. Let it work for you. So we'll be talking about them throughout the show. Before we dive into the games, I always like to ask this. Your thoughts on the slate. Is pricing soft? Is it definitely a 2 QB build? Are there other things, are there stone min values? We only have 8 games and it's really 15 teams and then Iowa. So it's like, what do we have to choose from? Is it limited selection or are there enough playable guys at every price point?
It's a somewhat tricky slate, not really because of pricing.
Okay.
Pricing, I think, is neutral. There are a couple guys that are cheap that you can use. They all come with some risk. There's not like your free square min player. But the reason I think it's tricky is the quarterbacks. There's maybe half the quarterbacks we're just not that interested in from a talent standpoint, or maybe their offense is pretty neutered. Michigan, I'm looking at you. And then the other half are priced up. So you have Milroe, you have Beck, the quarterbacks that actually have some decent talent. They're up around 9K on DraftKings, which makes this pretty tricky quarterback area. And I think 4 running back builds are fine. Still trying to get 2 QBs for the most part, just because of the upside they provide. But I think quarterback is what is going to drive this slate. And I think we're going to see some decent ownership on that Boise UNLV game.
Let's get into it. Let's pump up the likes right off the bat. Appreciate everyone being in here. Talk NBA. Well, you can bet the Knicks to win the play-in tournament and donate.
You don't want me talking NBA. I'll tell you.
You don't want me talking NBA either, but let's go Knicks. Miami of Ohio and Toledo 7.5. Let's start there. Not a great total. Kind of middle of the pack though, and I want to talk about Miami of Ohio and specifically their quarterback because I think he's one of the guys. I want to ask you first of all if he's playable, and then is he pairable, or is this a guy that we're running naked and Smith? I've seen him play a lot. Got some experience, but talk to me about Miami of Ohio to kick off this slate.
They did a good job pricing Avion Smith. Normally, I wouldn't want to play a guy like Avion, but he just is so cheap that he does a lot for your lineups. He projects relatively well, but I mean, it's a good reason we do this show. I think that projection comes with a narrow range of outcomes. He's not a player that comes with like a big standard deviation that provides large ceilings. The offense has morphed under him. It's even slower, and they were already 130th in pace. They're kind of rivaling the Armed Force triple option teams at this point, and their pass rate has plummeted. So I certainly do not want to stack Avion, and I kind of think he needs to punch in a touchdown on the ground or 2 if he's going to provide you a ceiling. Unfortunately for him, he's facing the best defense in this conference, Toledo on the other side. And I mean, Miami, Ohio is second in the conference in total defense, which is why you see the total coming in really low. I have a little more interest on FanDuel where he just does so much for your lineup, but this is just a sprinkling for me. I think you can get other upside elsewhere and more of it. So Avion, tricky. I would have more interest in like smaller field stuff, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And you mentioned it obviously puts tremendous strain on the passing game in terms of volume. Does he put tremendous strain on the backfield? A guy like Amos with his dual threat ability at quarterback, is that vulturing carries from the backfield, or was that not a playable spot to begin with?
It does vulture some carries from the backfield. The problem with Amos, I think, is actually his limited pass game role. It's not actually Avion. They just use other backs when they're on third downs or in pass game situations. You'll see Kenny Tracy and Kevin Davis. Amos has one of the lowest route rates for a lead back on the entire slate. And they're 7.5-point underdogs, 7-point underdogs, depending on where you look, likely to be a negative game script. When we've seen him in this position, the roll comes down. So he only averages 13.9 touches per game. He has games where he has like 22 touches where they slaughter teams like Akron. And then he has games with like 12 touches where they're playing teams like Toledo and they're down. So he's risky. I would rather go elsewhere. I don't personally have any Amos.
Anything else from Miami of Ohio? It seems like towards the bottom of all the teams in terms of priorities.
Yeah, I think we hit on it. There's a couple really cheap receivers, but Gage Larvadane is warming up. So that kind of puts the axe to Miles Marshall, Javon Tracy, any of those guys we were interested in. And I mean, it's the MAC championship, kind of expected Larvadane to play. He'll be the alpha when they do pass, which is not going to be often.
On the other side, you mentioned Toledo's quality team. DeQuan Finn is a quality player. Where is he falling? You know, again, we've got a lot of quarterbacks in this slate, and a lot of them find themselves within $1,000 of his price point. Does that render him not really playable, or is he someone in that kind of upper mid range that is playable, just sub 8K?
I think he is playable. This is a price range where I think you will find some contrarian options, which I think DeQuan Finn fits that mold. He's a very good rusher, 530 yards on the ground. The designed attempts are kind of all over the place for him. Last 4 weeks, they've been pretty suspect, actually. 6, 2, 3, 6. For a mobile signal caller, you'd like that to be higher. So I think he does come with some risk. But, I mean, we just don't have a lot of good quarterback options. So if you want to be contrarian, I think you can use him. I would make a rule to not play him and Penny Boone together. Okay. They take up a ton of salary, and they directly cannibalize each other. Toledo's not a pass-heavy team, only a 40% pass rate. So unless Miami, Ohio gets up in this game, I'm not stacking DeQuan Finn. That's just not something I think we need to get to. And then they'd probably have to score like 35, 40 points for both DeQuan Finn and Boone to get there on the ground together. And their team total is only 26 because the game total is so low. So I'm okay with Finn. I'm okay with Boone. He has an excellent workload, 16.3 touches per game, averages 112 yards. But I absolutely do not want them together.
Do you have, just because I'm trying to kind of piece this together, and it sounds like we're pretty much done. Do you have any situation where you would want 2 Toledo players with no quarterback, Boone plus a pass catcher?
I didn't actively limit that, but I also just didn't get it because it doesn't project that well. So I would say probably not, unless you're playing something really contrarian and you love the rest of your lineup.
Anything else from this game?
I think we're good.
I think it's going to be a close game for what it's worth.
Agreed. I would bet Miami, Ohio a force, but I already played the under.
Yeah, I agree. I think the under is completely fine. Get to a much better game environment. We got Oklahoma State and Texas playoff implications here. Large spread, though. Oklahoma State tried to eliminate themselves last week against BYU, but literally accidentally won because BYU is just awful. You mentioned Bowman already. We know that there could and probably will be passing volume. You mentioned Ollie Gordon. We know there's going to be 30-plus upside in touches. Where are these guys in terms of the big playmakers for Oklahoma State on this slate?
Team total is much lower than we've seen in recent weeks. So I think there's maybe a little bit of shock for people. If you're running an optimizer or a sim, you're not getting as much of them as you might think. And they've just played some very easy teams. So, I mean, against BYU, you were getting a lot of Ollie Gordon, Bowman stacks. Against Texas, you're not going to get as much. And I still think people are going to click these players. Just Ollie Gordon is likely to win the Doak Walker. He's a household name at this point. He is 9K, but we've seen his upside. He has multiple games over 200 yards rushing, averages 24 touches per game, 132 rushing yards. And then as a pass catcher, he has another 23 yards per game. The upside's clear, but there's alternatives on this slate at cheaper price points in better matchups. So Ollie's a guy I would tread a little carefully with, especially on like FanDuel where he's above 10K. But I still think you can use him. You just don't have a lot of backs that can touch the ball 30 times. In my opinion, he'll still be somewhat owned, though. In the receiving game, in the pass game, Alan Bowman's pretty affordable on DraftKings and FanDuel. I am very concerned about the upside with him. 250 yards is his listed player prop. Again, I was betting unders on those. He doesn't rush, so he needs a 300-yard bonus, probably even at this price, just because of the other quarterbacks on the slate. The only thing I'll say is the receivers are still cheap, and it's very condensed. You know exactly where the ball is going. Brennan Presley has 19 and 14 targets in back-to-back games. He's still a pretty good value. Rashad Owens, the volume's come down a little bit of late, but he's still averaging 9.3 targets per game over the last 4. And Leon Johnson, he's at 8 targets per game over the last 4. The only real separator here, I think, is Rashad Owens on FanDuel, where he's significantly cheaper than those other two. But on DraftKings, I think they're all pretty efficient. I have the most interest in Presley on that side. And I think those players I'm using primarily as run backs to Texas stuff or skinny stacks with like Baxter, Worthy, rather than using them in Oklahoma State stacks.
No Bray?
Bray had like 11% of the routes. So I think he's just been beaten out by those other guys.
Fair enough. Before we get to Texas, same question, because this offense may be a little more appealing in the sense. Any interest in a Presley, Gordon, no Bowman?
I think you can do that. I have more interest in this offense versus some other ones. Unlike Miami, Ohio, and Toledo, Oklahoma State plays fast and they're very pass heavy. So As long as Texas doesn't completely shut them down, they're going to have more volume. And even for guys like Owens, Johnson, Presley, that might just mean PPR volume. Maybe it's not the most efficient, but if you find your way into like 9 catches for 65 yards, that could be usable at their prices. The slate is smaller than normal.
On the other side, certainly Texas is supposed to carry what is going to be this point total, and I need them to because I bet the over. Quinn Ewers, he's not being asked to do a ton. You're talking about much less volume in terms of pass attempts, not going to give you really anything rushing. Does that make him playable? Simple question.
I think because of the team total here, yes, I have interest in other signal colors in this price range over him. But you also have this premier leverage spot because Baxter might be the most owned player on the slate. He's going to be a top 3 most owned running back. And Ewers provides direct leverage off that if they just throw the ball rather than score via Baxter in the ground game. Ewers is still throwing to one of the most talented receiving corps in college football with Worthy, A.D. Mitchell, Jatavian Sanders, and Jordan Whittington. So I'm going to have pieces of him. I would say I still prefer Beck and Milroe in this price range, though. But overall, just looking at my exposures to Ewers, he's around 20% for me. I am running 150 today, and he's always stacked, largely with runbacks in the Oklahoma State receiving corps as well. Just mainly a leverage point play off CJ Baxter.
Do you have any Ewers and Baxter together and just like Texas onslaughts?
Yes, I do. I do have some, and that's just because the team total is very high at 35 points.
It seems like Baxter, price adjusted, one of the strongest plays on the slate. I want to ask you though about Blue in that backfield as well. A couple of different questions. One, would you look to pay 11,600 for both of them? Too much opportunity cost there. And then how do you break up how much exposure you want to each?
I do think there's too much opportunity cost just with Ollie Gordon and a lot of running backs we haven't talked about yet. Very, very strong running back slate. And with Blue, I think you're still making an assumption on the carries because Baxter left last week's game out of precaution. They were slaughtering Texas Tech.
Yes, they were.
He was dealing. Yeah, I know. I bet Texas Tech. He was dealing with a little bit of an injury, so they just pulled him and rested him. He's fine here. Blue is a weird situational runner. He's like this dynamic track star, not necessarily the best actual running back. So I don't think they're going to increase his workload much. I'm anticipating somewhere between 6 and 8 touches, more of your home run hitting change of pace, whereas Baxter, they have shown a willingness to ride in the Jonathan Brooks role. Prior to that Texas Tech game where he left with injury, he had back-to-back games with 21 and 20 touches against Oklahoma State's defense, which is 97th in run D and outside the top 100 in pass D. There's room, I think, for Baxter and Ewers to get there together. But with Blue, I'm just not sure what the role is going to be. And he had like this amazing touchdown run. It was like 70 yards or something last week. That priced him all the way up to 6K. He's more expensive than Baxter on this slate, which is just flat out wrong.
Anything else from Texas? Obviously, it's a target-rich environment. You've got Worthy, you've got Mitchell, you've got Baxter, maybe even some stacks. Seems like one of the better teams on the slate.
Absolutely. Worthy's one of the best receiving plays on the slate. I try to make him a priority. He's averaging 11 targets per game in the last 4. If you want to leverage off him in Ewers stacks, I mean, Ewers already will be kind of contrarian, but then if you ignore Worthy, you'll be very contrarian. And to do that, I think you look directly at A.D. Mitchell and Jatavian Sanders. Mitchell is expensive, so you're going to get hyper leverage with him. Sanders is much, much cheaper at 3,700, so he'll be somewhat owned, but he still only averages 4 targets per game. I think that's because of injury. He was banged up in like week 3 this year and dealt with an ankle through a portion of the season. A fully healthy Sanders, I think, goes back into a larger role. So I have no problem playing Sanders here. To rank the pass catchers, I'd go Worthy 1, Sanders 2, A.D. Mitchell 3. Not going to play Whittington.
We had a question, about Gordon's ownership. Yeah, I think he's going to be still pretty damn popular. You mentioned he's been on every slate and he's getting 30 plus touches. I don't think he'll be nosebleed popular because of the price point, but looking at our stuff, and again, you can always get that link below. We're going to talk about that a little later in the show. I think Ollie Gordon will certainly not going to be sneaking by anyone, even with a deep running back pool.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. I think the 3 most owned backs will be Baxter, Mekhi Hughes, and Kamani Vidal. And then Gordon might be 4. He'll be like 4 or 5, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Vidal, we'll get there. That guy's going to have a day, though.
Yeah, he is.
He really is. All right. Boise State and UNLV. This game, again, I somehow thought San Jose State controlled their own destiny. They did not. They are not here. Competitive spread. Maeva is going to factor in, but let's start with Boise State side. Some names, certainly Genty in that backfield. What's going on with their situation? It's been a personnel nightmare with Boise, but are there names that we need to focus on for this slate?
This is the best game environment on the slate. Does come with some risk, but you want pieces of it for sure. So it's a good one to spend some time on. Boise, the slight favorite, 61 total. Taylon Green, I love his mobility. They just don't use it. He has exactly 6 designed attempts in 3 straight games. Some of those Maddox Madsen was still playing, so take this with a slight grain of salt. Now he'll have all of the designed rush attempts to himself, but they still don't like to do that. They prefer to drop him back as a passer, which is weird. It's not his strength. But because of that ability to run, I don't think he's a guy you can completely X out. The only other problem I see with Taylon Green is that they've just gone so run heavy in recent weeks. On the year, they have a 42% pass rate. That's dropped below 40% in games they've been leading. And he's not involved in the run game. So it's just like this hyper condensed workload to Genty and Holani, and Green can get iced in these games. So I am concerned with that. I brought him down a little bit. He still projects really well. Just it's hard not to project well in a game environment like this at his price. But I do think he's risky. And then to get to Genty and Holani, these guys are probably going to combine for 30 to 35 carries. Split between the two of them. But Genty has the pass game role, which is what I'm really trying to hone in on in this game environment because UNLV's defense is awful. Genty also is just so efficient. I understand having a timeshare in this backfield to some degree, but like the 50-50 timeshare just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. This is me putting my GM hat on, but ultimately Genty, I think, is worth a, 20 to 30% share in your lineups, your portfolio, that is, if you're running 150. But I have a hard time going any higher than that just because Holani is going to play 50% of the snaps. And the price difference is pretty high on these guys. But at the end of the day, I still want pieces of Boise. So they're pretty tricky. And otherwise, the pass catchers, we talked about Green suffering from this elevated run rate that stemmed to the pass catchers. You have Billy Bowens, you have Austin Bolt, and you have Prince Strahan running routes on every single dropback. But that's been extremely volatile just because you've seen games with 16, 17, 18 pass attempts. So if one of them doesn't have a big play, it still could end up with a 0 in your lineups. I'm mixing and matching those cheap Boise guys because they do play every single snap. And when they do throw, and you know exactly where it's going, it's just how often do they actually throw? So for a game environment like this, Boise's actually a little trickier than I thought they were going to be.
Is Green cash viable, or is just with his limited possible role in terms of volume, not where you want to go in cash?
Yeah, I think you can play him in cash. I have a tough time with that. I think there's probably like 5 cash locks, 6 cash locks, and then the last positions are very hard to fill out.
Yeah, I mean, it's that kind of slate. Anything else from Boise? You mentioned the pay down wide receivers. I don't really know what else there could be.
No, I don't think they split tight end 50-50, so I'm not too interested in Riley Smith or Matt Lauder.
On the other side, UNLV definitely have some pieces of the puzzle. I actually want to just start with Ricky White because I think he's that important. You mentioned 5 or 6 locks for cash. I assume that he's got to be one of them.
Yes, he's one of them for sure. Okay. I think there's another cheap receiver on Troy who might be the best price adjusted play, but Ricky White's right there. You could rank him first or second. He's averaging 109 yards per game. Just talent-wise, he's a Michigan State transfer, so he has the pedigree and talent. Volume is there. He has a 35.5% target share. It's the highest on the slate. Ricky White should be one of the first people in your lineups for cash games. And I think Maeva is the first quarterback that you're looking at for cash as well. He doesn't have some of the same risks as Taylon Green. This team just isn't really going to take the same approach in games. Even when they're winning, you'll never really see Maeva with like 15 pass attempts. They're just more balanced than that. So he runs 244 yards. He wasn't the starter all season, so don't look too much into that. His yards per carry and stuff and his designed attempts are pretty solid. And then as a passer, he has awesome efficiency. Boise's defense is still horrendous. They're allowing 8.5 yards per pass, 4.2 yards per carry. Maeva beat you in both ways. I think really the only concern with him is turnovers, and that's more from a betting perspective. For DFS, there's situations where that can actually help you. So I think Maeva, Ricky White is a great place to start for cash games. And then for tournaments, Jacob DeJesus, we talked about him with prize picks. Awesome route share. Only saw limited snaps previously because of injury. Now he's back playing a full-time share. He had 7 targets in back-to-back games. I think you can use him. And then the last thing, they changed wide receiver 3s last week, and I dug as hard as I possibly could to see if this was injury related, but nobody reported on this. Seneca McKee played less than 5 snaps, and you saw Corey Thompson jump into a 90% route share. 90%. He's the stone man. He saw 4 targets. This is a 1-game sample. So this is a sprinkling for tournaments. I wouldn't put too much weight into this. You could see it go right back to McKee, but that might be worth a dart for an offense that's going to be really popular. Corey Thompson not going to be owned, and you do have a chance at like a 90% route share with him.
Anything in this backfield, that seems like the one spot that doesn't pop, completely for UNLV, or is there something that we should focus on?
They use 4 guys, and then Maeva's involved too. So it's very difficult to project. And it's like crazy. This is Oklahoma of the Mountain West. One week it's Vincent Davis, then it's Jaden Thomas, then Lester and Reese. I had a very difficult time projecting these players. And it even stems to the pass game, which is weird. Normally you have sort of like archetypes for backs. This guy's a good pass catcher. This guy's better through the tackles. But I mean, like one week it was Courtney Reese with 40% of the routes, and then it was Thomas. Literally no pattern to this usage. So I split it pretty evenly. And I think that's the best way to do it rather than just rolling the dice on who they decide is going to be the lead back this week.
Anything else from this game? Definitely one of the better ones, particularly this UNLV side.
Yeah, absolutely. Play pieces of it for cash. I'm looking at Maeva and Ricky White.
Yeah. We had a question about that. Some of those, like Maeva, Ricky White, Baxter. Certainly we'll get to Troy. I would say Barber. Are those some of the top cash game when you rattle off the ones that I think are basically plug and plays?
Yeah, for cash, I think you're looking at Maeva, Baxter, Vital, Hughes, Jabre Barber, Ricky White, and filling out the rest of your lineup from there. Yeah, which is like 2 spots, which is why it's hard. I don't know what to do with the last 2 spots.
It is a lot of 2v2s in that kind of situation. Double QB, yeah, I think I know running back is very strong, but still, if you can make it work, double QB is always kind of how I would lean.
I agree with you, but I will say, like, if you're scared of Taylor Green, which I am, perhaps irrationally, and you just feel better about a running back, and it just makes you personally feel better about your cash lineup, I think you can run 4. I don't have a problem with that. And it might just be my own personal bias, not liking Taylor Green.
Do you have any Green and Maeva together?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
For tournaments.
For sure. But that's good to know there is game stack.
I guess for cash, too, we're debating Taylor Green for cash. You could do it in cash.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you could. We'll see.
I don't know. Taylor Green, man, is so risky. Like,
he really is.
He has exactly 17 pass attempts in the last 2 games. He hasn't hit 30 pass attempts once this year. He's been above 25 one time. And that includes the games early in the season when he was the full-time starter and they had like a different offense. Now they've morphed into this. I don't know what to describe. It's not triple option, but they very clearly do not want to. It's like Michigan when they played Penn State. I think if Boise could run the ball every single play in like a second half and not be worried about losing, they would.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think they're going to have that luxury, but they could. It's a competitive spread, so not impossible.
Yeah, it's at least a risk we need to mention.
Best game of the day, but I don't know if it's going to be the best DFS game. I do think it has a lot to talk about, though. We got Georgia and Bama. Georgia, slight favorite, inside a touchdown, but we know what we're dealing with here. You had mentioned to me over on Odd Chopper, which you can always go check out all our betting takes. Talk about Odd Chopper in a little bit. That Georgia was very conservative with their personnel against Georgia Tech. A lot of guys didn't play. They're getting healthier. We know they're going to be out there today, unless you tell me otherwise. But I would assume it's all systems go for this offense. So what does that do for Carson Beck and his his stacking options? And how do you attack Georgia's offense?
I think there's a lot of room for this game to go over, and it's taken money in that direction. Beck and Milrow are both expensive, so your lineups are going to look different and you'll have to make some concessions. But I think as far as ceiling goes, this could benefit you for tournaments. Beck specifically, you already broke it down, so he just hasn't played with a healthy position group in a long time. Now he'll have everybody back, presumably. Georgia just took the precaution route against Georgia Tech and sat a bunch of guys, but we're expecting to see Bowers, Ladd McConkey, and Ra Thomas all return. Lovett played, so no concern there. Those are your four main pass catchers, all projected to suit up for them. And Beck's been awesome. He runs a little bit, which is surprising. And then the efficiency through the air. I mean, Alabama has a defense that I respect. It's the best defense Georgia's faced. But you just present so many matchup problems with those four pass catchers. I think Beck is still stackable. He's averaging 290 yards per game. And I think it could be better than that if they didn't just completely take their foot off the gas against Georgia Tech. He was averaging over 300 yards per game prior to that affair. So I do like Georgia stacks. I like that you have different players at each price point. I'm still trying to get Bowers if you can at 74. He should be semi-contrarian just due to the injury. And then second, Ladd is kind of difficult. I'm trying to get to Lovett second most among the pass catchers for Georgia. The only other player that's semi-interesting is Dylan Bell. They use him in weird ways. He's more like a gadgety Deebo Samuel guy. He'll get carries occasionally. Really cheap, but I think you might see his routes cannibalize the most with all those players back. So just trying to be careful with Bell.
What do you do about Georgia's backfield? You've got Edwards, you've got Milton. We know that they'll give these guys work. The price points fluctuate at times. They're both up there here. Do you think they can run against Bama's front and enough to keep them in the conversation, or too much opportunity cost?
I want some sprinklings of Milton just with how efficient he's been lately. But I think there's a lot of opportunity cost. Like Milton's not necessarily super cheap. So
no, he's not.
Yeah. I use him in these like game stacks with Jalen Milrow on the other side specifically. But I do have a little bit, yeah. No Edwards, though.
Milton with Beck?
I don't have any Milton with Beck.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, we know what this team can do, obviously. We did have one question. It does relate to it a little bit. We had, would you rather have on FanDuel Carson Beck or Green from Boise?
Beck. I
Anything
think
else?
Beck is safer. I was trying to like make DraftKings lineups in cash work with Beck. Just not really feasible with all those other guys we mentioned. On FanDuel, you can do it.
Anything else from the Georgia side? Again, we know that they've had a lot of guys banged up, but it seems like they're getting healthy at the right time.
Yeah, it's well said. I actively tried to get more Beck and Milrow for that matter, just because this game, I think, has a lot of upside. Like both defenses are good, but I'm not sure they've seen offenses with the same firepower much this season.
I agree with that. No doubt about it. I do think Bama's going to be able to move the ball on Georgia's defense. Milrow, he crossed 100 yards rushing in the Auburn game. What do we look to with him? Is it a skinny with Burton or Bond? Is it running him naked? How do you break down how to target Milrow if you want to get there?
He's really tricky because he still didn't have a lot of designed attempts, despite going over 100 yards. Like a lot of it was scrambles. He had 5 designed rush attempts. So I still think the projection on him should be somewhere in 40 to 50 rushing yard range rather than up near like 70 or 80, just because it's not designed. So he's tricky for that reason. Like I don't want to use him naked just because you don't have the projectability of this rushing. The stacks, I think, are a little thin price-wise. You just have so many better options on like Texas, and Ricky White is only a little bit more expensive than Burton and Bond. But for game stack specifically, I am trying to stack Milrow with Burton and Bond. If you're going cheap, I'd use Amari Niblack, their receiver tight end hybrid, who's 3,500. But I'm not trying to get to the other guys like Benson splits time with Law and Hale and Prentice. I think it's pretty condensed there, but it's still risky. I feel better about the Georgia stacks versus the Bama ones. But again, I am running some lineups that are exclusively game stacks where I do have Milrow with pass catchers.
There's a lot of guys that are sporting, the Q tags to varying degrees. Is McClellan an actual game time decision? Do you think there's a chance that he sits?
I actually think he does sit, but
okay.
we don't have like a lot of knowledge on this. He's been dealing with a foot injury all year, and he aggravated it in their last game. I don't know. The coaching staff seems to think a little higher of him than I do personally. I think Roydell Williams is just better. We have this projected as a 50-50. So it had previously been like a 70-30 in favor of Jace McClellan. At 50-50, Roydell's a reasonable projection. But then if McClellan's out, like they don't use any other backs. Jam Miller, the Oregon State transfer, maybe siphons off a couple touches, but this should be the full Roydell Williams show. This game is in the afternoon window, so there's plenty of pivots if the news comes in that McClellan does suit up. But I think Roydell is worth a strong look. I wouldn't play him in cash or anything like this because of the risk, but yeah, he saves you a ton of salary at running back, and the role could be very good.
Yeah, you mentioned you're just not going to find that many running backs at flat 4 with that type of potential workload if it's his backfield. Even in a wild game script, I don't think he gets phased out completely. Hughes, Baxter, or well, you got really good options there. In terms of Hughes, Baxter, or Vidal, I would go with the Troy running back, but I don't think you could go wrong.
I agree with you. Vidal, I would rank 1 among those 3.
Yeah, I would too. What else from Bama? Anything?
I don't think so. I think we hit it all.
Yeah, this is obviously an awesome game. I will say this, it has nothing to do with the DFS slate. And I know, but I'm telling you, if Alabama wins the game, I don't know how they'll do it, but they will get into the playoff. They will rewrite the rules before they leave the SEC out.
I tend to agree with you. I don't know how you leave out an SEC champion.
Yeah, I just don't know. Like I said, I totally get it. If you get beat in your own house by another team.
But also, like, what is that is the strongest win in the whole country. Yes. And the Texas game was in week 2, and it was a very close game. Bama had chances to win it. A Georgia win is the best win of the last 3 years.
Yeah. I'm no Bama fan. They're not going to get left out. I would be stunned. But that's what's going to make today absolutely fantastic.
What you could do is just leave FSU out, which
that's where it gets really hard. You should just, I don't know.
I mean, if the playoff committee cares about money, they're going to leave FSU out. I don't know if they will or if they should ethically, but if FSU makes the playoff, there's a strong chance that I don't watch that game and watch whatever New Year's 6 game is on instead.
There you go. Watch some college basketball. We got 4 games left. We're making good time. I do want to say very quickly, though, if you are looking for a little more, if you're in a betting state, if you want those type of tools, if you want our Discord, if you want kind of everything we've revamped with OddsShopper Premium, the link is below. If you haven't been over there or you've heard it in the past, I would encourage you to at least go in the description of this video and click the link and see the new offerings. It's a completely revamped package. What we really decided to do was bring the best of every world to every type of bettor. Whether you're doing this for real and you're really, really cognizant of every edge you can get, we've got tools for that. Whether you say, you know what, I'm just with my buddies sometimes on the weekends and I like to put in a few bets and I just want to see if I can make a little money on the side and have some fun while I'm doing it, we've got something for you as well. Check it out. We've got weekly and monthly passes. My man Mike just dropped it in the description, in the chat as well. I would encourage people. And when you get in there, make sure you hop in Discord because that's really where it gets dangerous. SMU and Tulane. SMU, of course, loses Preston Stone. So let's start there. Who is Kevin Jennings and is he playable?
He's a freshman. He's, at least according to recruiting services, a pocket passer. Absolutely no sample on him whatsoever. He's played in mop-up duty a couple times, but that's it. So, I mean, we're talking about games where they're blowing out teams like Navy. No, absolutely nothing about him. Our projection is just based on the Vegas total, which is low, 47. They're slight underdogs. Tulane's defense is respectable. It's one of the tougher defenses SMU's played this year. SMU's played this extremely weak level of competition, and it's not their fault. Since the Big 12 ravaged this conference, there's no good teams left. So, I mean, it's pretty tough going for Jennings. If you think he's even remotely comparable to Stone talent-wise, then I think you could look to him in tournaments. The one thing I'll say is SMU does recruit really well. They have one of the highest NIL budgets of any team in the country, which is wild because they're not a Power 5 team. So, I mean, he's no slouch from a recruiting standpoint, just haven't seen him. The only other problem is he's not a runner, and this team uses like 18 receivers. I'm not kidding. RJ Maryland, Jake Bailey, Romello Brinson, Jordan Hudson, Keyshawn Smith. Moochie Dixon, Roderick Daniels, they all average somewhere between 45 and 55% of the routes. So for a quarterback you need to stack, I mean, maybe you don't need to stack him, but I would recommend stacking him. He's very hard to do so with. I only have one lineup in a 150 set with him. I'm actually curious to see who he's stacked within this now. I'm going to take a look. Have him with actually I have two of him, one with Brinson, one with Keyshawn Smith. So that's what I'm doing. If you're running only a couple lineups, I'm not sure I'd recommend it.
Anything in the SMU backfield?
So Jalen Knighton and LJ are expected to play here. We've heard this before, and they haven't played, like last week. This game means more, obviously, than Navy. But at best, you're looking at a two-way committee. At worst, you're looking at 3 or 4 ways with Kamar Wheaton, Velton Gardner, maybe even Tyler Levine involved. I'm staying away.
On the other side, talk to me about Tulane. We've seen them. Certainly Hughes is a name that we're going to have to pay attention to. Does that render Pratt sneaky, or is he still on the outside looking in?
I think Pratt actually is sneaky. Again, this conference stinks. So there's been a lot of weeks where they haven't been pushed. And they're almost like Michigan, where they're very willing to take their foot off the gas, play super slow, and run heavy. Pratt's awesome. He has 321 yards, pretty good designed attempt numbers. For reference, he has better designed attempts on the ground rushing than Jalen Milroe. It's unbelievable. 7, 4, 5, 7. Like, these are pretty decent numbers for a QB. Pratt's sneaky in terms of his mobility, and he's hyper efficient as a passer. He only averages 217 yards per game through the air because he's only throwing 24 times. He needs a willing dance partner on the other side. The spread is still close, so I think we will get that. But like, if Jennings falls flat on his face, Michael Pratt might throw the ball like 20 times today. So there is risk, but I think Pratt's good for tournaments if this game gets a little more up and down than we think. And for reference, if Preston Stone played in this game, actually, I want to ask you, what do you think the total would be if we had Preston Stone versus Pratt? I think it'd probably be above 52.
Yeah, I was going to say 54.
Yeah. Somewhere just shy of 55 in that key number, but pretty healthy, I would think.
Yeah, I think so.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Just an interesting thought exercise. If you think that Jennings can keep it up and down a little more than the books indicate, could be interesting for tournaments.
App State and Troy, another under the radar matchup. You've got a Sunbelt clash here. I do like Troy in this game. I know the market's going against me, but let's talk about App State. I have a feeling it won't take too long because I really respect Troy's defense. Who on App State is playable, and are you looking to get over the field on anybody?
You could play Aguilar as a contrarian option. His body of work, I think, is tough to evaluate. He's a young kid. He wasn't expected to start the year, and Berger got hurt in week 1. Since he's gotten more reps, he's actually improved quite a bit, and he's played well against good defenses. This team beat James Madison. He is somewhat mobile. He has 270 rushing yards, a lot of it coming from scrambles. As a passer, he averages 271, good efficiency metrics. Troy is the best defense he's faced this year, at least in the Sun Belt, but not by that much. James Madison is a pretty good defense too, and he had a reasonable game there. Tournaments, I think he's okay. I would stack him exclusively with Caden Robinson at 5K, coming off a 10-target performance. They just rotate so much outside of him, but this is still just a sprinkling. And then I don't know how healthy Nate Noel is. Yeah. They used him in a timeshare, and then he didn't play at all last week. And then Kanye Roberts is also dealing with an injury. Just not sure what we see from the App State backfield. And it's a very difficult matchup. I'm just not sure you need to mess with that specifically.
On the other side, stud running back Barber is an egregious pay down price at 4,400. Is Watson in play as a contrarian option at quarterback?
Yeah, they throw a ton. The only issue is he takes sacks. So he kind of needs to either stay upright or to throw for 300 yards. Both are live here. App State has a decent pass rush, nothing amazing. And then he could easily throw for 300 yards. This App State defense is horrific. They're especially bad on the ground, which we'll talk about with Vital, but I mean, you can still beat this team over the top. If you stack Watson, I think that's decent for tournaments.
Yeah, Vital should have a field day. App State's front, I think, is going to be gashed. Part of the reason I bet Troy. We know he's cash viable. Is there anything else? Are we worried about the weather? I am not. The total hasn't budged that I've seen, so all systems go for me.
Yeah, well said. Not worried about that. Only would be if we saw something with the total dropping, but it hasn't. And then Vital's the perfect combination of talent, workload, and matchup. And price. He's not expensive. He's reasonably priced for this slate. He's probably the best running back play on the board.
Yep. And if it's raining, they should just give him the ball 40 times. Watson or Aguilar?
Watson.
Yeah, I would agree. And you save some money. All right. Louisville and Florida State. What a game it's going to be. Probably the most key to the playoff of any of them. Let's start with Louisville. First of all, I want to get it out there. I don't like this team. I have a bias against Louisville. I can't stand them. I just can't stand the team. I don't think they're any good. Plummer has not played well. You've got Thrash on the outside, who's a straight alpha. They're going against FSU's defense, and they are no joke. Is Louisville playable today, and who do you want to target?
I guess total's really low. Plummer's tough because he doesn't run. He's not cheap. And their offense is very willing to run the ball if it's competitive. They only have a 45% pass rate, which is very unlike Jeff Brom teams. They're also slow. They're 103. It's just a price point where I'm finding myself either going down to the Maeva, Taylor Green, Gunnar Watson range, or going up to Beck, Milrow, Ewers. Not really too interested in Plummer because of the price adjustment when you look at the 46.5 total. The backfield's kind of devolved into a two-way committee, which is awesome when you're playing weaker defenses like Kentucky and stuff. But now you've got Florida State, who still is an elite defense. It's going to be something close to a 50-50 committee. Both are a little too expensive for my liking. It's basically just, do you want to play contrarian Jamari Thrash or stay away from the team entirely? Everyone else is in a rotation. Thrash hasn't seen quite the same workload since he got injured, but he's been working back to it. 8 targets was a 4-game high for him. They should throw the ball to him incessantly in this game, but by no means an easy matchup. Would rather play Worthy, Ricky White, Bowers, the other elite receivers, but for tournaments, if you're stacking Rodemaker or Glenn or using Benson, maybe you could do it.
On the other side, so this was the big news. Rodemaker, he's in protocol. I don't know what the hell's going on. He's got a concussion issue, a head issue. I didn't think he was playable, but I want to ask you, if he is ruled out, would you roll the dice with Brock Glenn?
I put a handful of lineups, less than 5% of Rodemaker in my lineup set. He's stacked always, so that gave me some I played around with 2v2s. If you do this, you can pivot right down to Glenn, who's cheaper, and then pay up somewhere else. So that's how I'm using him. It's mainly just, I like all the skill position players for FSU. We just have no certainty with QB. So because of that, I want to play some Johnny Wilson, Keon Coleman, Trey Benson. And by putting Rodemaker in your lineup, you have access to maybe 100% of a Brock Glenn start, if that's the way it shakes out, and with 2v2 swaps. So, I mean, that's kind of tricky if you're like drinking or something today. I wouldn't do this. I would just X out Rodemaker. But if you're paying attention, I think it could be worthwhile and an edge.
Yeah, alcohol makes these swaps much more difficult.
Yeah, I'm going to be having some, so we'll see if I can keep myself together.
This is going to be a test. Yeah, I mean, they got dudes. You couldn't ask for a better situation if you're being thrown into the Lions Den with Wilson on the outside, Coleman, Benson. I do respect Louisville's defense, particularly their front, but it seems to me more of a one-off than stacks in this game with Thrash and maybe one of the alphas for Florida State than targeting the quarterbacks.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Sam, I live in Louisville and I love my team. We ain't played anyone. FSU gonna dog walk us. I hope you are right, my friend. I kind of think so too, but I've been wrong on Louisville a lot this year.
Yeah, I thought that when they played Notre Dame.
Notre Dame. Yep. And then I said they'll get beat. And then Pittsburgh walloped them.
Walloped.
And Kentucky beat them. I just stop. Just
very, very weird stuff. As you would say, shady stuff.
Very, very suspicious is what I would say.
Shady.
Yeah, let's see what's going on here. Let's talk about the final game. We'll get some questions. Michigan and Iowa, a 35-point total, a half-point first half team total for Iowa. Talk to me about Michigan, Quorum and the backs. I know Iowa's a good defense. How much volume did they get? I think it's very reasonable to say that there's a chance Michigan doesn't throw in the second half.
Yeah, they played a better defense in Penn State and did just that. Sorry to Iowa. It's very easy to look good when you've played Tanner Mordecai and Brennan Sullivan and these guys. So I don't know how good they are. Maybe they're awesome. Maybe they haven't played a good offense this year. They've been outgained by teams like Utah State. So they're definitely not going to score. The only thing with Iowa is like they will throw a decent amount and all the price catchers are down. So maybe you could luck into enough PPR volume with like Caleb Brown. I don't know. I don't think it's worth it. And then on Michigan, it's basically, do you play Corum or Edwards, or do you just pass? I'm interested in Corum as a contrarian spend up. He has carry counts of 26, 28, and 22. We've seen what they will do against teams like Penn State, and that's just run, not look back. Could use him in tournaments, I think.
I assume you're not playing anyone from Iowa, right?
No.
Do you think they score a point in the first half?
No.
I kind of think
I think they get shut out like Penn State.
It's such a tough scene. It's one of the toughest of scenes, but I'm not going to waste any time on that. We had a question from Ben Pave in our Discord, by the way. Just good people. He said, can you guys hit on total lineup salary? How important is it to use close to the full 50K? If you got a couple lineups and a slate like this, and they're close projection wise, but one leaves, upwards of 1,000, is that something that you're okay with, or would you look to upgrade?
This slate, I think it's pretty tight, spending most of my salary cap in a lot of lineups. I'm scrolling through right now. I see a couple that have like 500 on the table. It's slate dependent, of course, but on this slate, I think you want to be pretty close to using it all. Maybe like, I don't know, 600, 500 maximum, unless you really like your lineup. It's a pretty tight slate.
We had one more, a 3v3. This is tricky. So we've got Gunnar Watson and Barber for Troy with Ollie Gordon on one side, or Aguilar, Vital, and Presley on the other side.
The former.
Okay. Yeah, that's tough. I would agree though. If McClellan plays, what's the pivot if, say, you have 4,200 left?
In the night games?
Yeah, because I assume it would be, anticipating you're going to pay down.
Like at that time, you have so many games. Like you could go down to a Boise receiver. You could play like FSU has some cheap options. Like Johnny Wilson's right there. I mean, there's tons of swaps, man. Like there's so many.
From Sam, Super Chat, appreciate that. 5,500 or less, super flex. I already have Barber and Baxter. Let's see what we can find.
Yeah, if you could help me with that, that would be sick. I got to get my CSV in.
Yeah, no problem. I would.
You're a wagon.
I would look to Presley. I think you can certainly do that for Oklahoma State. You mentioned outrageous targets. Yeah, there's not as much there really. If you want to take a dart throw, if you're going mega aggressive, you've got the alpha wide receivers for Florida State. I think that's more tournament centric. Love it for Georgia, but for me, it would be Presley with Oklahoma State. I'll take a couple more. Milroe and Sanders, or Bowers and Presley. I would probably go with Bowers and Presley, even though that does make lineup a little funky. Ashton Genty and Johnny Wilson, or Xavier Worthy and Trey Benson. I would go with the Genty side, but I will say Boise freaks me out in general. We talked about Taylor Green early in the show. I think there's just a lot of ways that game goes sideways, but I think it's less likely that the backfield is impacted than the quarterback, who could just see some volume. Yeah, I know. What a world. Georgia, Bama, Michigan, and Texas on the slate, and we're targeting Troy and App State. What a world. Does Benson get most of the work for FSU? I certainly think so. No matter who that quarterback is, they need to lean on him in that running game. He should be really busy. To me, as I know you're kind of tightening up, I just think the problem with Benson, not that he's not playable, you are competing with legitimately 5 or 6 backs in the same range that are outstanding. Vital is right there. You talked about Milton as a dart throw. Hughes is there. If you get up to Genty is there. Ollie Gordon obviously is a pay up option. Boone is playable. Not my favorite, but he's playable. And then of course Baxter is I think a cash lock at 56. Not worried about his hip. I think the volume will be there. Best 3.5 play or lower for flex. Let's see what we can find down there. Yeah, I mean, when you get down there, you're going to have to look to probably some of these like dart throw options. Let's see what our projections have here. Yeah, you've got De Jesus for UNLV, those type of players. I don't think there's a ton down there. It's not a slate where I look and I say, oh, plug and play at that price range. Devontae Ross, another guy. Again, that's kind of what we're looking at. Benson.
I'm pretty good on my CSV. I can answer some stuff too.
Oh, we'll tag you back in. Benson or Corum on FanDuel?
Corum.
I would go Corum as well. Javon Tracy, yeah, that's another play that you could do.
I do not love Javon Tracy.
Okay. Are you looking to get that low? I
have a decent amount of DeJesus.
Okay. Yeah. Owens or Ladd?
Rashad Owens or Ladd? I would say Rashad Owens is safer.
Okay. You think Ladd's tournament viable though?
Yeah.
No more Pac-12 after dark. For me, it's Pac-12 AM because those games are on so late. I just watch them in the morning. So, rest in peace.
I have to rewatch the Pac-12 championship because I fell asleep.
Yeah, you should rewatch it because Oregon's coach, who I'm a big fan of, took a super, super questionable late decision to accept a holding penalty when they had timeouts that were fleeting, and I don't think it cost them the game, but it certainly didn't help. What Boise State wide receiver do you like the most?
Oh, I guess Bowens.
Yeah, it's pretty rough. Yeah. Owens and Worthy or Mitchell and Johnson?
The former.
Yeah, the former, definitely. We talked about for cash, Baxter, Barber, Vital, certainly Maeva. I think those are really the names. Ricky White. That's really the core. And then I think you are doing kind of 2v2s at your own discretion.
Yes.
Yes, Vegas did have Oregon 9.5. And I'll tell you a secret. If they played again today, it would be like 8.5, which is kind of disturbing because Washington has beat them now twice. Beck or Pratt?
Beck.
And final question before we bounce on out of here. FanDuel and for wide receivers, is it White, Worthy, Bond? I mean, other guys, same concepts that we've kind of talked about in that player pool.
Yeah, they're similar price over there.
Yeah. I think we did it, friends. We're in good shape. But if we didn't get to something, at Matt_Gajewski, at JazzRaz DFS, we are here to help. We're on social, we're on OddsShopper, we're on Stokastic. We are everywhere. And so is Mike Lawrence behind the glass, powering these shows, making them look crisp and clean. The unsung hero of this three-man team. We appreciate you guys. We're not going anywhere, though, because bowl season is upon us. We're going to have all sorts of content here, so you want to stay tuned. But I just want to thank everyone for a hell of a season. Let's finish it strong today in Conference Championship Week. I want to see those Stokastic avatars at the top of the board. Hopefully, Matt Gajewski's right at the top. But for me, for Matt, for all of us here at Stokastic, good luck. Enjoy your day. We'll talk to you soon.